Welcome to a special edition of the Blue Room. We've got no title for this one. It's just an interview with Gav Buckland because we love having interviews with Gav Buckland. It's me, Les, and Rodger, and of course Gav. I'm halfway through the trilogy of books that Gav's done. Yeah. So I'm just pre-Billy Bingham sacking. I think he's on the road.
All right.
Yeah. I don't know where this is going to go. You know, my dad has told me all about what happened in the 70s, so I kind of know the story. And Rodger has just finished The End, which obviously is the final book in the trilogy. Yeah. Gav, was it a bit serendipitous that it's sort of that's where the book cut off, and like you did the three? Did you always plan to do the three as a trilogy?
No,
or was it kind of the first one? What?
Yeah, in fact, the first one was just going to be really around Danny Katsick, but I know Rob Schroyer was doing one at the time, so I thought I'd take away from Katsick the personality. I'd look at Everton in the 60s under Harry Katsick, and then leave it at that. But that finished in 73 and got quite a bit of good feedback and stuff, and a couple of quid, and it just seemed logical then to do another volume, really. Start off in 73, and then the end point was naturally 85, because otherwise it was too big anyway. I ended up the one you're reading, Les, it's 160,000 words. It was originally 182,000 words. That's to edit out 22,000 words, which is a bit of a job, to be fair.
Yeah.
You know, and so that was up to 85, because that made 60s started off good, title win, ended up not so good. That means the 70s to the mid 80s starts off not so good, end up being good, and that means then the next one naturally starts off as being good, and then ends up in 94 being, well, I think not so good. It's probably paid us a compliment, really. And so there's a reason why the years are set out. You know, it is serendipitous, if I could say. I can't spell it. You know, I don't think that's that word is not in the book. I think, and but it did work out nicely. It was an unintended consequence, really, but it gives it a nice boom and bust feel, which is always good, rather than just static for 10 years, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, there has been a lot of boom and bust over those decades, obviously, but I think one thing is, like, the club has rarely changed, and the fans, I don't think, have ever changed. It's like, we still seem to be the same fans that we were in the 60s, just through the generations. You know, when you talk about like young players getting a hard time, but like a very vociferous crowd.
Yeah.
Attendances would drop when things weren't going well. It seems like it's been through the decades. I think every generation of Toffees think this is just what we're like, but it's like, it seems to have been like that the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I've not really got onto until I certainly wrote the first book, that stuff doesn't change. You know, not only with Everton, but within wider football is, you know, well, the club, you know, I know we talk about Everton's relationship with the Big Five and Big Six, whatever. But, you know, the clubs who are successful don't really change that much. And I don't want to be a spoiler. I don't want to do too many spoiler alerts here, Les. But and Rodger, you've read the third book. In the early 60s, you know, Everton was sort of wanted to form a Super League, you know, wanted to be one of the teams behind it. And, you know, and there was an article in the Echo saying the European Super League will be starting. Real Madrid wants it, Barcelona wants it. There is, you know, the question now is who else will join? And that was in 1960. Yeah. So, you know, a lot of the themes that we're talking about in football now, you know, we're certainly around 60, 65 years ago. And with regard to Everton, I mean, the way the club operates now, the way it's looked at by other clubs, and the way it's looked at, most importantly, by the media, a lot of that is the genesis of that is in the early 60s when John Morse came in. I'd say probably between 60 and 64, 65. That is when I think the current, you know, Everton attitude that we have now, and attitudes to us as a club, were formed in terms of being insular, in terms of the way we operate, the way the press treats us, and the way we allow the press to treat us. That's all sort of wrapped up in the early Moore's years. There's a quote John Moores, in case those people who listen to this may be not familiar, John Moores was Litwood's chairman, well, Litwood's head, and Litwood's at the time were the richest private company in Britain and were for many, many years. And in 1960, Moores got involved with Everton as chairman and pumped some of Litwood's money into the club. So you don't know the story. That is the story. And Moores, I think, there's a number of reasons we became hated, for want of a better word, because we were rich. And also this, like, because they got their money off the pools, fans got onto the fact that they were doing the pools each week, and their money was ending up in Everton, in Everton centre forward, of other clubs. And so there was that element, and there was a couple of tabloid stories about the club. It was seen as game. I think when tabloid press first started in the early 60s, over drug cheating in the title winning season of 63, we got caught up in, obviously, the betting scandal that involved Tony Kay, even though he wasn't at Everton when it happened. And the club, as a result of that, I think became quite insular. Harry Catrick was somebody who learnt early on. In 1961, we got beat by Sheffield Wednesday quite badly at home, and he just joined us, 61, 62. And some of the players went to the press and complained about our tactics and stuff. And so Harry then thought, well, like, keep your players close, but the press close is still sort of stopped any sort of relationship, I think, with the press. I think he didn't want that. I think he felt undermined. And that's where a lot of Harry's attitude towards the press came. And so consequently, with all that, with people having a go on us, people criticising us not being the most popular club in the country, that bred a certain insularity that had always been there. And I think it was driven on by the fact that as we well know, we are the senior club in the city. And at that time, we had a reputation of being quite haughty, conservative with a small c. I suppose you want to say a reasonably posh football club. And so the club didn't like change. It was very boardroom led, and during the 60s was a time of great change off the pitch. As you all know, society changed, but also great change within football. Television became increasingly important. Player power became increasingly important because players became cultural figures in themselves. Certainly on the back of the World Cup winning in 1966, and so things were changing both on and off the pitch. The way spectators watched the game changed. Hooliganism, of which Everton got a lot of criticism for, that was one of the other reasons why we became so insular. And the board, Everton didn't like that. That went against the grain of like 70 odd years of football up until the early 60s, where the game had pretty much stayed the same. And it was very much against that, all those changes, I think. There was a telling conversation in a I think shareholders meeting in the early 70s, but an angry shareholder stood up and goes, "Why do Everton have to be anti-everything?" And that was the reputation we had in football. I mean, I remember as a fan, Rodger, you may remember yourself in the early 70s. I remember my dad telling me, everybody hates Everton. And I think an element of that, not all of it. I certainly think the insularity, the distrust, I think, maybe of outsiders, I think that's remained pretty much during that period. That's certainly the wider supporters' view of the club. We've had some great people work at Everton and stuff like that over the years and have now, but it's very difficult to change that culture. But, that's ingrained, that's been there for years. It's very, very difficult to change that, even if you want to. It's just there. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot more to that. And I write in the last book, I do, as you well know, Rodger, I do a long read at the end about those type of things.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant section. You certainly saved the best to last. Yeah, carry on, do.
Yeah, and I talk about that a lot in terms of how it had its roots in the 1960s, and of course what supporters say. I think possibly unfairly is, but look across the park, look at Anfield, you have Bill Shankly, it's a lazy statement to say, Harry Catrick, whoever, Harry Catrick, didn't like the media, He certainly distrusted him. Didn't like it. He was just a bit. I think I'd say distrust is probably the best word there. He felt there was a bias against all clubs who were Man United, but he wasn't alone in that, to be fair. And we looked across the board and said, like, Shankly courted the media. I don't think that's true. I think I say in the first book, Les, that the media courted Shankly. We talk about the cultural change in football, tabloid press, television in the early 60s. They needed people to sell their product. And I think they saw Shankly as somebody who was quite willing to do that. And willing to do it because Shankly had an enormous ego.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if you read out Melsby's book, he talks about that, I think, a little bit. And I think, so Shankly loved all that. But initially, certainly for the first few years, it was the media. The media wanted Shankly more than he needed the media. And the comparison with Katzek is a little bit unfair on that. As is like, how Liverpool welcomed the media and all this stuff. Liverpool banned television in the mid-60s. But nobody hears that. It doesn't fit the narrative, does it? Bill Shankly didn't. If you remember, like Football Focus, which is still on now and on the ball from in the early 70s, Shankly wanted them banned. He felt that he had an adverse effect on attendance and went public with that. That doesn't fit the narrative, does it? And I think that's another reason why the club, from a sort of media perspective, it's been criticised because of comparisons across the park. I would say that not a lot of them are valid. I think, as I say, it just, they just fit the story. But then you get a reputation, then, don't you? And I think if the one conclusion you read from the three books is not a lot has changed.
Yeah.
And the insularity, and we'll talk about separately because about how it affected the club at certain times. But we've always been an inward-looking club that doesn't really like change. And I think from a modern perspective is the game's changed so much over the last 20 years. And I think certainly from when the Premier League became big at the end of the 90s, clubs changed to adapt to that. And I think Everton as a club have struggled to do that. We talk about we spoke about a room 101 for Everton in the at the start, before we came on air. And you know what? I think the one that I understand totally why people say it, but I want to move away from it when people say we've got our Everton back. I don't want our Everton back in the modern game. In the modern game, you don't want to have our Everton back. You want a new Everton. How you get there is a totally different conversation, isn't it? But I don't want that because to me that spells insularity. A reluctance to change, and that's not reflecting the people there now or have been in the past. That's just the culture that's been inbred within the club certainly since the early 60s. And that one final example, I'm conscious we're going on at the time. In 1964, Moores, and I was amazed at this. Moores, you think, who allowed a lot of bad publicity to the club, even though he's Littlewood's owner, you would think as a company you'd understand the need for good publicity and advertising, wouldn't you? I never sort of aligned them two things. Moores was worried about it, that he got a couple of Liverpool. You've read this; it's a really interesting story that speaks volumes. He got a couple of social scientists, as we called at the time, from Liverpool University. To study was called. I think the study was called "Why Is Everton Have a Bad Reputation in the Media?" Something like that. And one of the things he recommended at the end was Everton should appoint, as soon as possible, a press officer. And guess what?
3 years later.
More tapped on it for 5 years. It was 5 years in the end until David Exel came in. And David Exel wasn't even a press officer, he was a commercial officer as well. And he just sat on it. And I think I think that sums up a lot of things, really. You brought somebody in to see how things can change, and then don't take any notice of what they've said. And I think, and I say that culture has been there since the early 60s. It's fascinating how it's not changed, but then again, it's fascinating how a lot of things in football haven't changed, albeit some clubs I think have adapted better to the change. It helps if you've got £500 million a year, by the way.
Definitely,
as turnover, you know what I mean? But it's just a fascinating thing.
Gav, I think everything, I agree with virtually everything you've said there. And the point about nothing's changed is the point, and that is the problem. Because from my perspective, we never thought we needed to change. We never thought we needed to adapt because we were Everton. It's a grand old team. If you know your history and all of this baloney, really, that you know, we've won these huge amounts of titles, which aren't actually that many. You know, in those 63 seasons from when he took over, John Moores, to the present day, you know, what have we won? We've won 4 league titles in 63 seasons. You know, we've won 3 FA Cups and 1 European trophy. So thinking about the modern age and thinking about the changes, yes, that happened in the 60s, and some of those changes that came through the 70s, the 80s, commercialisation of the Premier League, you know, the clubs that have succeeded have been able to, A, adapt, Liverpool in particular, Manchester United, Arsenal have been able to adapt, and other clubs have just reinvented themselves, right? Completely reinvented themselves. And Everton have failed to do that, failed to reinvent themselves, and just a fundamental refusal to change. You talk in the 60s about the big five then. You know, the big five then included Burnley and Wolves.
Yeah, absolutely. What is it now? Yeah. I mean, the big five at the end of the 70s was Ipswich and Nottingham Forest.
Ipswich and Forest in it. I was surprised Villa weren't in there because they were, you know,
well, yeah, exactly. Exactly. But this was late 70s. And I think, you're right. I mean, where we stand, I know it's a separate thing, where we stand in the hierarchy of English football. But you are right. There's a little bit of, I think, probably Glasgow Rangers in that, failing to adapt as well to historic clubs, massive clubs within their countries. Obviously, Rangers, because only 2 clubs in Scotland in a hierarchy set far higher than Everton. But they're another club, I would say, who failed to do so. I think the best example of that is I think, I don't want to, again, another spoiler alert, so you might want to put your hands above your ears, but you're a knowledgeable guy, you'll know about this. Is the bit, you know, we were part of a cabal of clubs who wanted to change English football in the 80s, mid-80s, the so-called Big Five. Whether we deserve to be the Big Five is a different thing. It's Everton, Liverpool, Man United, Arsenal, Spurs. And so they create, you know, wanted basically what became the Premier League. And so you had Phil Carter, who's Everton chairman, who became Football League president. So we were probably, you know, from a governance perspective, the most powerful club in the country, because Carter was both league president and Everton chairman. And so it's quite clear the game was moving a different way. You had like young executives, or relative young executives, like, you know, you had Irving, Scholar, David Dean, Martin Edwards, Man United. And they saw the vision for football, the future, which was the big clubs, in their eyes, deservedly, should get most of the money. Rather than the way it was done years before, where any money the Football League got was split between the 92 clubs. So they thought that was unfair, and they were probably right, and it was unhealthy for the game. So we then get this period, which is a really damaging period for Everton, I think, within all of this. This is where we sunk ourselves below the waterline. Between winning the second title in 87, and not even the start of the Premier League, I'd probably argue about 90, 91. Yeah. And this is where it goes a little bit wrong for us. So we've got a big opportunity there. And I think there's 2 things happen. A, from a footballing perspective, Colin Harvey coming in, we start to struggle. And then, you know, where money was still tied into your gates then, in the late 80s boom of football, all the big clubs start getting bigger gates than what they had done in the mid-80s, you know, back at Italia 90, all that type of stuff. So Premier League, top flight attendances go up by 20% between 86 and, say, 91, 92. Ours go down by 30% because we were artificially inflating the 80s, mid-80s because we were good. So we're losing money compared to them. But that wasn't the story. It's what we were doing off the pitch. Those people like Scholar, David Dean, Edwards, Liverpool a bit behind the times, by the way. Though Peter Robinson was great. They saw the future. And what do we do in 91? I think I didn't write this, Rodger, and again, it's a bit of a spot. I think Carter realised it's going a bit wrong here for the club. I'm going to get out a little bit here.
Yes. And he left it to a GP.
Yeah. So You then got David Marsh, who is a doctor and a fantastic golfer, one of the greatest amateur golfers the country's ever had. Becomes chairman. There's a couple of statements from his opening interview where he goes, I go to Goodison because my GP surgery's nearby, and I like to attend as many away games as possible when they coincide with golfing dinners. And he's the chairman of the football. You know, he's like the head of the football club. He should he should be leading Everton into this new age of the Premier League and stuff. I know it took a bit of time to gain a bit of traction, but there was a vision there in the late 80s and early 90s that you had to sort of get into. And, you know, so while everybody else is bringing outside people in and consultants and all this, Everton has got a GP. As chair, and not only that, a part-time, chaired by the looks of things. And that was the really damaging period.
Yeah.
We did have an opportunity to rein things in. And I'd argue we've not really recovered from that failure to take advantage of it.
Gav,
you know?
that's also a classic case of jobs for the boys, though, isn't it? You know, we talked about culture and insularity earlier in terms of, you know, we don't trust the outside world. We want one of our own. Bingham, one of the, you know, the key appointments, you know, because we were looking around at other managers.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about some of those that might have been either later or in another episode. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, Harvey was the wrong appointment. And even when Harvey struggled, he decided to appoint Jimmy Gabriel from within.
And
even when that was going to ratchet, you know, we bring Kendall back, which is something you never do. So
with Harvey.
Well, with Harvey, it seems to me that once you're inside the Everton tent, right, either because you've played for the club or you've had some association with it, you are always a preferred candidate. And the only person that's come from outside the tent and made a difference is David Moyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just quickly on Colin Harvey, if I can just sort of say, I can fully see why the club made that appointment, because you know, everyone at the time was saying he was kind of the brains behind the operation, which maybe he was on the training field, but making that leap from assistant manager, who's the sort of go-between with the players and the manager, does the coaching, to manager, it's a totally different job, which he clearly wasn't really cut out for. And, you know, he had all the issues with the older players who'd won stuff, the new players coming in on bigger wages. There was a lot to handle there. And if you had no managerial experience, then it's going to be really difficult to deal with. But I can see why the club maybe did that. Plus, they'd also watched Liverpool do it for like about five managers over the way. So there was probably that. But I think the issue probably is that they didn't act on it fast enough when it was going wrong. And then when they did, they just went back to Howard Kendall. I think there's stuff in that.
That book room had been built up for many more years than ours. You know, you make the point, Gav, that, you know, when Paisley takes over from Shankly, you know, Paisley's been there for 15, 20 years, hasn't he? You know?
Yeah. So you've got Liverpool lads, 7, 8 people in their boot room, you know, going up from Tom Saunders, Ruben Bennett, you know, through to Joe Fagan, Ronnie Moran, Bob Paisley. Yeah, Jeff Twentyman, who's really part of that structure as well. And so when somebody left, everybody just went up one.
Yeah.
So really behind the scenes, there wasn't that much of a change. Where at Everton in '87, it was just Kendall and Harvey. So when Kendall's gone, you've got Harvey, and there's a little bit. I don't mention the book. There's a little bit of Harvey and Roy Evans, I think, where Evans was the last of the boot room boys, where he was then left alone. Yeah. You know, there was it's one of them things. You know, we've all done stuff, podcast stuff. Oh, you know, Wish had said that or whatever, missed that, and that was one. When I was talking about that, Rog, that was one. Other points you should have made. The comparison was that all the boot rooms gone, and there's only Roy Evans that's left, and then Liverpool changed, and I think that's when it started to go south for them. Yeah, you are right. I mean, and I think they were seduced by the cult of continuity. You're right, Les, in that I don't remember a lot of Everton fans saying, "Oh no," you know. In fact, there was a few who were saying this is good because it's not really Howard, you know, it's Colin, you know. And it was quite by about the September, it was quite clearly going wrong. And I mean, and again, you know, like yourself, Colin's problem was, and this is the classic insularity piece, isn't it? Really. So he's got appoint a coaching staff of 4. What does he do? He appoints 4 Evertonians.
Yeah.
Well, you know, well, Graham Smith had been there, Peter Reid,
Terry
Nick Lang, Terry Dadico. They were all at Everton fans. So you got that photograph of all 5, all true blues and all this. Well, you don't want that, you know, in that perspective. Regardless of the skills of the coaching staff, which, to be fair, some would say were negligible because they had no experience of coaching at that level. It's just this. I say it was just the insularity, and there were opportunities there. I say in the book, a great appointment would have been Don Howe, who was free in 1987, who'd worked with the Everton players in England. Yeah. Colin Harvey was a great believer in Howe's methods, so there wouldn't have been any friction there. And Howe would have been a great appointment, and he would have given a bit of gravitas on the coaching pitch. And so we end up with basically 5 Evertonians, and then it starts to unravel, and you can see straight away one of the reasons why it's unraveling.
Do you think part of that insularity is because, I mean, and this is something that I'd never thought of before, but it struck me when I was reading Money Can't Buy His Love, the fact that Everton never have had, apart from Alan Ball, an actual world superstar playing for them. They've never been a team of superstars. So it's like the club has kind of made the players what they are. So then they become like Everton players, and that's like the identity of the club and the players.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason why it's so insular.
Absolutely. I think that's a reflection of the board and what the board wants. But certainly in the 60s and 70s, what the board wanted from the staff underneath it, and that includes the manager. They wanted them to be basically subservient to the board, and more specifically Moores. You know, and that's why there's a great example of that in the mid 70s. As you well know, if you're around, I suppose I got on the end of it. Really, it was like 20% inflation. You know, something like that. So if you were a player, you signed a contract, and a 3-year contract, you already see by the time your second year, unless you were Peter Shilton, who actually had an inflation based contract, is you were losing money after and the players went to the board, and they probably weren't the only club who did this, to be fair, but this is an example. I can only speak about it. Went to the board and said, like, listen, we need more money, and Everton wouldn't even, and also as well, what Everton would give them was restrictions based on, because the government wanted to reduce inflation and stuff. And Everton wouldn't even give the players what the government said they were allowed to give them. It was just a way of keeping the players in their place. And I think certainly, that I think a top player who knew their way wouldn't accept that. But if you were a Midland player who was just happy to play for Everton Football Club, it would be a little bit more acceptable. And I think that was one of the things that was characteristic of the club in the 60s and 70s, and in the mid-70s, that led to a lot of unrest. Everybody fell out with Billy Bingham, stopped trying a little bit, some would say, and Bingham gets a sack. And I think that was an example. There was a little bit of master and serf, I think, between the board and the players, because that had been the way football had started in the 1880s. That was always the relationship between the board and players, a distance and management.
It's funny, isn't it, how often we talk about the club, Gav. I didn't mean to butt in, but, we even now today, we talk about the club, right? And the club does this very well. And like you said, we've got our Everton back, and we say, give it to Ferguson, or isn't it great that Leighton Baines is on the coaching staff? And we're falling for the same, almost Everton contract, time and time and time again. That there is this thing called the club, and somehow ephemerally, this culture of, subservient players. It's such an honour to play at Everton. It's such a and football's not like that anymore. Players want money, they want rewarding, and they want they want to succeed and they want to win shit. The question I wanted to ask you before we get off this managerial thing with Kendall is, Kendall and Harvey, Clough and Taylor, discuss.
Yeah. Well, we sort of had this discussion last week, and it did sort of. It again, one of those. If I do a paperback, well, there will be paperbacks. I might put a little paragraph on this, Rog, because me and Rog were talking about this pod last week, and there's a Clough and Taylor thing. I think what happened with Everton in the early 90s is what happened with Forest in the early 80s, where you've been successful in the decade before, but at the start of the following decade, it doesn't work. And one of the reasons why it didn't work with Forest in the early 80s is Clough and Taylor fell out, didn't they, over the Taylor came and did a book without telling Brian Clough in 1980. But a very good book, by the way. And in fact, the quote's in the third, in the end, one of his things. And so that partnership that had driven to Forest and Derby to so much success, it starts to fracture, I think. Yeah. And also, at the same time, Forest aren't buying as good a players as what they were doing when they were successful. Roll on 10 years, Colin comes back to Everton with Howard, which is just a ludicrous decision, but hey, and they're now different people. That it's important because of the journeys they'd had since the mid-80s. Yeah. That partnership wasn't nearly as effective as what it was going to be. Plus, the club wasn't buying players who were as good as the teams that had been successful in the previous decade. So there's an obvious similarity, I think. Though, for the record, Everton are a bigger club than Forest.
Of course. But Taylor never succeeded.
I wouldn't put Forest and Everton as two on the same level. Yeah. But in terms of how you go from success in one decade to relative failure in the next decade, there's lots of similarities between Forest in 70s, early 80s, and Everton in 80s and early 90s as well. And one of this, Rodger's spot on. It is the change in the relationship in the new decade between the two men who brought them so much success previously.
Yeah,
and Forest never recovered from it, did they? Really? I know they well this season. They could argue, as we just said at the start of the pod, Everton haven't really recovered from it.
Yeah,
and I also meant because Taylor never succeeded on his own. Taylor tried to go and manage and he couldn't work. I mean, obviously the relationship changed and they'd gone sort of fallen out a bit, but Taylor tried to manage and was a complete disaster. Harvey tried to manage, and like you say, some excellent managers are excellent coaches, but not all excellent coaches.
All managers can coach, but not all coaches can manage. I mean, Colin was offered the lead job, wasn't he, in '85? Turned it down. Yeah. And I think, we fell into that trap. I mean, we're talking about Don Howe. Don Howe was the brains behind Arsenal winning the title, wasn't he, in '71? Well, he went to manage at West Brom, ended up getting relegated. So it was a mistake to, in retrospect, obviously, it was a mistake to appoint Harvey, but it was an even worse mistake, I would say, to reappoint Kendall with Harvey. Was because that had no logic, looking back. That was welcomed by fans, but it was and they lost the way then. I mean, I think
do you think as a fan base we're a bit sorry? Do you think as a fan base, because you say it was welcomed by fans, and Les, you said we were pleased that Harvey had come in because wouldn't you know it was his team. Do you think as a fan base we're a bit too easily pleased? We fall into this. Oh, we've got an Evertonian coming in. This is great. Let's get Kendall back.
Yeah,
we've fallen I think with Moyes again, haven't we? Let's get Moyesy back, and we're all happy again.
To be fair with Moyes is, when you look at forgetting about his previous Everton connection, if you just based it over the last 5 or 6 years, he was the obvious man for the job, wasn't he? Really,
sure.
Because he was free success at West Ham. He just reappointed on that basis. But yeah, you're right, and I think some of that was behind the appointment of Harvey and the very swift appointment of Harvey in '87. Rodger, was that whatever misgivings there was of letting Kendall go, let's get all the fans back on board now by appointing Colin. Everybody's happy again, and I think Carter took a bit of a flyer there. I think he should have just given himself a bit of breathing space just to make a decision. I mean, it's a massive decision, isn't it? We're league champions. Exactly. We are one of the biggest clubs in the country. We've just lost our manager, and 2 days later, we're appointing the coach. Well, take a bit of time. Where's the strategy here, guys?
Well, can you remember a time when the league champions lost their manager at the start of the next season? The only time I can remember was Alex Ferguson leaving United.
Yeah. They've been paid.
I mean, managers don't walk out when they've won the league title. It's there's still so much behind that, isn't there? With his Bill Bow.
Howard, I think there's a lot in the end about Howard how shall we say, rather confused and diverse thinking between 87 and 1993. Yeah. I mean, it's an unusual situation, but I think the only thing I'd say there, Rog, is in 87 is you're looking at the other candidates. Well, who could join Everton? Each one as manager. Well, Big Ron's just been sacked. You've got Brian Clough, but Clough will never work at Everton. Clough will never work at Everton because of what we're talking about here is because of the power of the board and the way the history of the club. He wouldn't want anybody to take over. I mean, and to be fair, there probably a few clubs lost the Clough in that way. So there's not a lot there. McMenemy had burnt his bridges, hadn't he, at Sunderland. McMenemy had been interviewed in 1973. I mean, I think Venables would never have come up north. Possibly. They did. I think there was a conversation with Graham Taylor early in 87 to see if he'd be interested if Howard, because I think they thought at that time that if Howard went, then Colin would go with him.
But there was that whole England gig, wasn't there? Because you've got Robson was still in the mix there as well.
Yeah.
Before Italia 90, was Robson going to stay at England? And
Robson's been Howard and Bobby Robson is an interesting tale in itself, isn't it? Really, how a crossbar in Katowice changed the course of English football, doesn't it? Really, it certainly changed Howard's career. What it might have been and what wouldn't, what didn't happen. I talk about that in the book. Yeah, I mean, Robson's an interesting point, isn't it? Really, I would say no Everton management change between 1973 and 1998.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
It was not complete unless Bobby Robson was involved. And 73, I think he wanted. I mean, I think he was very. I mean, maybe sometimes he acted like a little bit of a dope. Some wants a better phrase, Robson, but he was very clever. He used Everton as leverage a number of times to screw Ipswich for a few more money. In 73, he didn't take it. I don't think he fancied it. I think he again, like, because the board were they were too powerful. That's what you were saying. And like Ron Saunders didn't manage it, those type of things. In 77, I think he did. I talk about that in York's just coming up to that, Les, so I won't spoil it for him. In 77, there's a lot of stories about 77, which are sort of shining a bit of a light on about what happened in 77. 81 is the club said that they weren't interested in anybody who was a current First Division manager. I think he was already in a job. Didn't want to poach anybody from the First Division. Then we get into the early 90s. Yeah, in 93, he's making nice statements about the club. In 97, 98 to say never happened. But I think Robson was typical. Ron Saunders was the big miss as manager. I think so. Ron Saunders. I think Bobby, for all his huge, Bobby was still a boardroom manager. I think he could work with the boardroom and stuff. With Saunders, I think Ron Saunders, who I think is one of the most hugely underrated managers in English football history, is managed Villa when he won the title in 81, twice
and
football
Scouser, and the Scouser to boot.
Born in Birkenhead, played for Everton, didn't he? A few games. Ron would have just come in, and he wouldn't have been flying to Liverpool like Bingham and Lee were. Would have just come in the 70s and just absolutely ripped everything up. And you do what I tell you. And he had the football knowledge and skills as a manager. Undoubtedly, to change things, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility that some of the stuff they did under Kendall in the mid 80s that would have happened. About Villa, he won the title with Villa in 81, didn't he?
Yeah. And the European Cup.
And effectively won the European Cup as his team, wasn't it? He could have easily brought the same success to Everton in the late 70s. And I think that was in many respects was a bigger miss to me than Robson. And I think he was a great manager. But I think it was right, Don Revie as well. You've read that, Les.
That was incredible. The fact that the government got involved.
Oh yeah. And a Skinner, they beast the bolt over. Yeah. asking the questions about Everton in the House of Commons.
That's not on the timeline, is it?
Yeah, that's surreal, isn't it? You know. Yeah.
Crazy, yeah.
And I think, you know, so Revy, they chased Moores to chase Revy. I mean, he completely fudged that, the appointment of Bingham. And I talk about that, and it was in the end, Jack Charlton convinced Revy not to go to Goodison. And so there's a number of managers, but I think ultimately they were put off by the board, and more specifically Moores.
My old man always said about Bobby Robson that he wouldn't come because he wouldn't manage in a 2-club city. You know, and it was Ipswich was nice and easy, and Newcastle obviously, but Barcelona. I mean, Barcelona's not really a 2-club city either, is it? So
no. But that is it. Have you heard that phrase? The Espanyolification of football.
No.
Tell me. Yeah, about like Espanola, the second team by the second team by miles behind Barcelona, is what happens like other cities that are like that, and Celtic use it in relation to Rangers. I think it was a Celtic fan who coined it, you know.
I love it.
That sadly at the moment there's a little bit of that with Everton, isn't it? They're outsiders looking in, only see the club. I mean, who's the Minister of Culture and Sport now? I heard her
Lisa
Nandy.
Nandy.
Last week, and she was talking about people coming back to Liverpool from abroad. It was in the context of regeneration and stuff, and she said, "Yeah, they come back to Liverpool because of the music and to see their football club."
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Surely.
That's a great segue. Let me ask you, because I consciously might be running out of time for this one, but let me ask you this. One of these things jumped out of the book at me. A number of them did. But your point about we basically lost the 100-year war against Liverpool by 1977.
Yeah.
Which was effectively, you know, the appointment of Bingham. You know,
Bingham on the back of appointing Bingham. Yeah. Yeah, I think
by then we've paid the price. We've been paying the price because this is. So I'm 13 years old then, and I grew up thinking we were equals, and I still can't. You know, the 80s maybe. I still thought we were equals for a bit, but you know, our rivalry and the fact that they're 19 league titles and we're 9, and they're 6 European Cups and all of that malarkey, and they're out of reach. And you say we lost it in that sort of mid 70s period.
Yeah, we lost it then. There's a sliding doors moment, I think, in 73-4 where, as you say, we could have got Don Revy, Bobby Robson in as manager. Liverpool, you know, they could have got into Dean St. John, Jackie Charlton as manager. You know, in the end they go with Paisley. So what happens in the mid 70s? There's a couple of things that go on in football. I think the mid 70s, which I think are enormously important to Everton, is. Well, when you started watching football, Rod, I think you may be a year or two older than me, there was like the industrial clubs, you know, the mid-60s was dominated by the big industrial giants, the big clubs, you know, Tottenham, Arsenal, Everton, Liverpool, Man United, City, Leeds, all that type of stuff, Chelsea. And it's enormously competitive. By the early 70s, those clubs start declining, virtually all of them, because of a couple of things. All their great managers have gone. Revy goes, Bill Nicholson goes, Matt Busby goes from United, and so on and so forth. Mason Allison leave City, and with the economic decline, they also start losing money, and so they don't restore their former glories. And what happens is Liverpool. Well, there's 2 clubs you can take advantage of that: Everton and Liverpool. Because by 73, you know, you think about it, United went down 74, Chelsea went down 75, Tottenham went down 77. In the mid-70s, neither Everton are nowhere near that level. You know, Leeds went into decline stuff. We've got an advantage. We can take advantage here. One of Everton and Liverpool can take advantage of everybody else falling by the wayside. And the club who takes advantage of it is Liverpool, because they appoint Paisley, and they make some smart transfer moves and stuff. We could have easily done that with the right management's appointment, because there was nobody to compete against you. You know, you look at the teams that finished second to Liverpool in 10 years after 74. QPR, Watford, Southampton. You know, not without Forest. You know, good team now. Ipswich, the provincial. You know, the massive provincial clubs, big cities have gone well into decline. And Liverpool had the field to themselves, and they took advantage of it brilliantly, to be fair. And they started getting European success, and that breeds more success, and you become richer, and you buy better players, and you get that virtuous cycle, don't you? And that could have been us with the right management appointments, but it wasn't. And that's when the gap started to appear. Because for three reasons. A, because Liverpool were enormously successful. B, they had no other competitors. And C, we'd made bad decisions. So by the time we win European Cup, 77, 78, they've gone out of our orbit. Yeah. But it ain't coming back, and we lost the war then. But it's that other point. I was thinking that, Rod, I made after that, didn't I? And I was thinking about that in the relationship to last Wednesday, that ever since then, we've been like resistance fighters. There's just been bits of resistance over them 45, 50 years, to fighting that battle. We've lost the war, but we're winning minor battles. And I was thinking about that, like, of Tarkovsky's goal perfectly, because that's been our derby history, hasn't it, over the last 50 years? It's individual moments at various times, not a thread of success. And if you've been involved in that, you can be like Danny Cadamarci, who still gets serenaded about who put the ball in the, so-and-so's nets and stuff.
That's right.
Yeah, and, do you think that happens with Ronnie Rosenthal? I don't think so. And
he's remembered for hitting the crossbar at Villa Park. That's what
not for the 93rd minute derby winner. Imagine if the player scored a 93rd minute derby winner. And I think, so we lost that war, and it was never coming back from that. Even when we got it back in the mid-80s, it's relying on us being, to keep Liverpool enormously successful, because Liverpool have become that big internationally and nationally that they will always going to have that revenue. And if you've got that revenue that comes from that, you give your chance of success. You've only just got to make the right appointments, and it took them, 30 years to make the right appointments, you would argue, wouldn't you?
So who do we blame for that, you see? Who do we blame for that? Because where I'm coming from it is John Moores has this aura about him, doesn't he? People often quote the John Moores, we've got a fantastic club and the fans deserve better. John Moores has this aura because, he brought in Catterick and we won some league titles and, he's still around, and how symbolic that he dies in 93. But there he is theoretically, and there's Everton Football Club at the height of its powers, the height of its influence, this massive opportunity, as you say, with competitors falling by the wayside. Do we blame Moores for not spotting
I think
through the door?
Yeah, I think the Bots management appointments in 73 cost us enormously.
I mean,
I think if they got Revy in, or somebody of that ilk, a really good manager, I think we could have easily, competed with Liverpool and matched them, because there was nobody else competing with Liverpool for the next 6 years. And we might get the odd. I mean, City had a good season, 76, 77, but but it's an interesting point where we got Forest and Ipswich, but longer term, they would have never matched the big city clubs. There's a great stat, isn't there? And what happened is, and I'm conscious of time here, is in the end of the 80s, when they changed a few things within football that gave wealth to the bigger clubs, as I say. Remember, they took the gate receipts away teams used to get the gate receipts, didn't they? 20% of all games. They took that away. So home teams got more money and stuff, and they take that out of the TV deal. What happens is, from the late 80s, those big clubs that had gone into decline in the early 70s and beyond start picking up again. We start picking up again. Arsenal start picking up again. Man United start picking up. Leeds start picking up again. And then the Premier League basically restores football back to its equilibrium. That's been established for many years. Of the big, there's 8 or 9 big provincial clubs, and there's that stat, isn't it? If you ever see it, that when City won the title in 2012, it was their first title since 1968, and 9 clubs who finished in the top 10 in 1968 finished in the top 10 in 2012.
Wow!
Bloody
hell. Yeah, the only swap was Leeds was in 68, and they were replaced by Fulham in 2012. Because that's what the change in the game about the rich clubs wanting more money for themselves in the mid-80s. That eventually was that end game, that we then get back to the traditional powers in the game that have been there in the 60s, get back to the top. Where in the interim period, you had like Watford, QPR, as I say, Luton, decent. All them clubs were decent. And Southampton finished runners up, didn't he, in '84? Didn't beat us in the semi-final, though, did they? And Yeah, and so just restored the traditional equilibrium where the power base stood in English football, from the late 80s. But in that intervening period, Liverpool had the field pretty much to themselves and took advantage of it brilliantly. It's a little bit like what's happening this year, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's right.
Just to bring it around,
we're the ones that are the big
go ahead, Rod. You got one more?
Whatever. Sorry, no. Just a final point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that we're the ones that we're the ever presence and all that. Yeah, we are. I know we are. We're 3-4 seasons out of top flight. Brilliant. But with the ever presence, we've got this opportunity. We've got an opportunity in the 70s. We can't quite capitalise it. We never sustained success. We've got an opportunity in the 80s, and we blame it on Heysel. And then the Premier League comes along, and we've got an opportunity because we're part of it, and we're the only ones of those big clubs that have never taken advantage of it. I know Spurs have never won the Premier League, but they've made a fair bit of money out of it, and they've been in Europe, and they've been in a Champions League final and what have you, and we laugh at them. But the Arsenals, the Liverpool, City, United, Chelsea, they've all grabbed the opportunity, and we are just kind of sitting there being same old Everton we were in the 1960s.
I think there's I think some of that's true. I mean, there'd be an argument to say that Liverpool didn't grab the advantage of the Premier League for 20 years,
No, very true. But they were still messing about in
But I know what
Europe
you mean.
and
I thought ultimately what it is, Rog, isn't it, is I think certainly, Arsenal made the mess of the Premier League first 3 or 4 years. There's them. The key thing within all of this, when we can compare ourselves to a big club and make the point in the book, is we do not have the international and national support of Man United and Liverpool, and we haven't got the fan base, the rich fan base, for want of a better phrase, and the access to commerce and finance that Tottenham and Arsenal have got. We've got neither of them two things. That being said, you see in modern football, you see in this season, you can make a few right decisions, and you can really get yourself in and around it, can't you? It's not something. I think what's shown us, and this is again another podcast, this thing about PSR and people being stuck at a certain level is the PSR is beginning to bite into the big clubs where they basically got no money, and there's no reason at all why Everton couldn't have done what Villa have done in the last few years, or
correct
things like that easy. So there's still hope there, isn't it? But
of course,
52 minutes, what we've spoken about is a lot of wrong decisions that we made along the way, isn't it? Really, and a lot of right decisions. You're talking, Rod. Do Arsenal be where they are if they don't appoint Wenger in '96? What happens if Man United not appointed Ferguson? What happened if Liverpool not appointed Klopp? Even Chelsea would argue with Mourinho, possibly. But Chelsea have returned into their norm now, aren't they? They've got they're returning to their norm, as indeed are Spurs. Because
that Wenger thing is about reinvention. Arsenal reinvented themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Arsenal's much more a George Graham. The culture of Arsenal is much more George Graham than Wenger. Yeah. Maybe next time what we can talk about is those sliding doors moments, because you're dead right. This is all about decisions, managerial appointments, players. And I'm not going to list them now as spoilers, but there are some incredible players and managers that we missed out on. I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah. I think that does bring us nice full circle on the episode, really, because it's a series of bad decisions occasionally from Everton, and also a kind of scattergun approach to stuff. Because just before we finish, over the last 7 or 8 years, we have seen the most scattergun approach to recruitment of managers and players I think any club's ever done, really.
Yeah.
And even if you go back to 73, when you talk about, when we got Billy Bingham in, it was very much like we went after 2 big name managers who didn't want to come to us. And then it was literally like, well, Billy Bingham's free and he used to be Everton, so should we get it? It kind of happened more by chance than any plan, really. So
absolutely. If he'd have been in Greece in 1973 knocking about, I'm sure John Moores would have given me the job too. It was never Evertonian, to be fair. You might have been your bucket and spade with you, but that was you were laughing. That is effectively what happened. Is there an Evertonian out there who can do a job?
It's been something that's afflicted the club, and as you say, now we've kind of got the perfect chance to reinvent ourselves, but we will pick that up.
Yeah, I think what I'd say, just finally to say here, in this time, we all know people who work there. There's not criticism of people who work at the club who are there now or whatever. Is what we're saying is there's the culture. So the culture and the seeds of that culture that started in the '60s. That's a difficult thing to change.
Completely.
You know, and that's what we're really talking about here. And we talked 54 minutes and only sort of covered the top bits. There's lots of stuff underneath the ice, isn't it, on the cake to discuss, Rodgers, you know?
All the fruitcake. You talk about the culture, that's what happens. It gets passed down from father to son.
Absolutely.
So what happened, the attitudes from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s get passed down from my dad to me and from me to my kids. And that's why the culture persists, because change is difficult and people don't like change. But I love change. I wish we could rip the whole thing up and start again. But that's an Orange Juice song. Save it for next time.
It is. We'll pick that up in the next one. I want to leave you with, I do like this idea of Everton resistance fighters. So Viva Santo Domingo.
That's what we've been. That's what we've been, Rob.
We're guerrilla all guerrilla fighters.
We'll pick that up next time. Cheers for that, Gav. If anyone's not got any of Gav's books, we'll definitely 100% recommend them. You'll fly through them. I'm flying through the first two. Gav, just want to let everyone know where they can get them.
Well, you can get it Mount Vernon Publishing. You can get all three for £50. But if you got one and another on Amazon, you can also get them. So you can get individual ones from Mount Vernon or all three there is for £50 or Amazon and all the usual places.
Brilliant. Yeah, go to your local bookshop and order it. Cheers for that, Gav. Nice one. Cheers for that, Rog. We'll pick up some Everton sliding doors moments in the next one. But for now, that's been all from us three. We'll catch you soon.